Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nigel Daring. I am the originator of a philosophy called Darwinism. Darwinism is the opposite of Darwinism. Darwinism is a philosophy of creation. And it's based on my analysis of Genesis chapters 1, 2, and 3. Now, that analysis takes place in my first book titled Existence, God, Man, Society, and Nature, which you're currently seeing in the background. It's available on www.amazon.com. And as I said, it fleshes out Genesis chapters 1, 2, and 3 and argues that those pages constitute a real representation of reality, and if we analyze them, we can come to understand our world, we can come to understand society, human nature, nature in its length and breadth. And so that's where the philosophy is going to go. It's a comprehensive philosophy uniting all strands of academia, all major branches of academia, and into a comprehensive view, and it provides a consistent and clear analysis for that when we look at it, we'll behold reality, we'll arrive at a different view from what we've been trained and accustomed to seeing. Now, in order for me to delve into this philosophy, I thought it would be a useful starting point to start with two formulas. Two important formulas. They're seminal formulas in physics. F equals ma by Isaac Newton, and E equals mc squared by Albert Einstein. Now, for this particular video and this particular presentation, I'm only going to focus on F equals ma, and draw some conclusions from it and show you where I'm going. And then in the follow-up video, follow-up presentation that I'll look at E equals mc squared. Now, let's take a look at this. The F equals ma consideration. Force. Now, when we're in junior high school, or even elementary school, and we're being introduced to the notion of a force, we're presented with this idea. A force is a push or a pull. A force is a push or a pull. That's what force is. And then by the time we get into high school and then into college, when we're really getting into Newtonian mechanics, we learn that force equals ma, F equals ma, which F is force, m in the formula is mass, and a is the acceleration of the mass. Now, let's translate. The first statement that we learn is that force is a push or pull, and then we get into this position where we translate that and we say force equals mass times acceleration, right? Now, let's look at this formula. F equals ma. F equals ma. We want to take a look at that. What is it really saying? What the formula is saying is that force is an accelerating mass. Force is an accelerating mass. Before, when force was introduced, it was introduced as a push or a pull. The force is the push. But then when we're writing the formula, we have force as an accelerating mass. These two statements are not equivalent statements. Force is a push or pull. Force is an accelerating mass. These are not equivalent statements. Why is that? Let's move on. What happens is that these statements reveal a limitation of the scientific method. Right? Limitations of the scientific method. The scientific method only examines phenomenon in terms of what it is we can behold. So when we know that an object, for instance, is moving, right? It is being pushed, but we're not looking at the push itself. What we're looking at is the accelerating mass. So what's going on is that we aren't examining the entire situation, the entire phenomenon. We're ignoring the push. What we're doing is examining the accelerating mass. The force is not an accelerating mass. The force itself is a push. Now, what that proves is that our senses and all the devices that we use to augment our senses, like the microscope or the telescope, that make us see further into the microscopic world or further into space. These things limit our consideration of reality, because all we're really gathering are what it is our senses can behold, but in truth we're not seeing the entire picture. Okay? We're not gathering everything that's out there. So there is this notion that science is giving us truth, where really it's giving us our limitations, and it's revealing our limitations with regards to truth and the extent to which we can go. What is beyond our senses, which may actually be real, and which may actually be impacting reality and impacting our affairs. What's current approach in science does, it ignores it, and it belittles it. It even belittles it when that might be a reality. So when we're thinking of reality, let's recognize that reality is beyond the physical senses, and let's logically deduce what might be out there and might be realistically impacting us. We've just recognized that there is such a thing as a push. We ignore the push and went for what it is that we could abstract out of the phenomenon of the mass that's moving, which is the mass itself. We're just examining the mass itself, but we didn't behold the entire phenomenon, which included the push. Okay, so what Darinism then does, and what this philosophy does, it's going to assert truth. And in asserting truth, it takes a comprehensive view which extends beyond human senses. And it assumes the perspective of the all-seeing eye, which is God's view. That means what Darinism is going to present is how God is seeing reality, so that we should be seeing through God's eyes. We want to not just look at the accelerating mass, we want to look at the push. Okay? And later on, or the push or the pull. Now later on, in this philosophy, what you're going to see, especially as we start talking about E equals mc squared, we're not going to talk about forces anymore. Okay? we're going to talk in terms of broader concepts that can be related universally. We're at both the microscopic level and at the macroscopic level, right? Whether it's occurring here on Earth or in deep space, we want to determine universal principles. Okay, so in coming up with looking at it, Darinism takes a very rigorous logical approach to this stuff. It's not wild speculation. It's not crazy religious fanatic talk. We want to look at stuff critically, analytically, and then make some bold declarations. All right, and once we make those declarations and look at everything comprehensively, what we're going to do, we're going to see a whole new look at what we have, our reality in a whole new light, and then come up with some answers. And we're going in that process, in terms of viewing things, view reality comprehensively. We're going to answer some of the great questions that's been boggling the scientific community. Now, in Darinism, in its assumptions of truth and what truth is, or its declarations about truth, sets the two important conditions. One, truth itself must come from God. That means where man examines and says he has truth, there's a certain limitation with which with any of those statements, because men are limited by their senses. They never see the comprehensive picture, as I showed in the statements that were made between the push and F equals ma, which is forces in accelerating mass versus forces of push. Those are different statements. So when it comes to truth, we must recognize that truth in its actuality has to come from God. Now, with that, Darinism is going to boldly state that it is the philosophy of God, it's coming from God, and it's a revelation from God. So, now the other important condition that's critical to truth being established is that philosophy, mathematics, and science must agree. Okay? They all must come together. So we want it. In other words, you can't just have science and say and make statements, or it might look good in terms of what you think you have in terms of evidence or your investigation, but if it doesn't make sense philosophically, then it cannot be truth. Okay? Math must agree with the science and the philosophy. Everything has to come together for you to have truth. So first condition, pardon me. First condition of truth is that it must come from God, and the second condition is that you'll observe, you realize that the philosophy, the mathematics, and the science will agree. Now, in terms of Darinist requirements of its philosophy, also in terms of philosophy or requirements of Darinist philosophy and philosophy in general, is that it must be rational and it must be consistent. Must be rational, must be consistent. Now, so this is the end of the first video, and that's the basic introduction to the philosophy of Darinism. We haven't really gotten into it yet, but what it is, it's a comprehensive philosophy based upon an analysis of Genesis chapters 1, 2, and 3, and we're going to open up those pages and show how they relate to our realm, to reality, to show that these pages reveal existence and God put them there for us to behold who we are, what reality is, and our place in the overall scheme of things.